Ethan was at his desk when his phone buzzed. Without checking who was calling, he answered, expecting a routine question from his assistant. "Mr. Carter?" The voice on the other end sounded shaken. "Yes? What is it?" "It's your wife, sir. She's been in an accident and was rushed to the hospital." For the first time in years, Ethan felt everything grind to a halt. He hurried to the hospital, a place that always smelled like a battleground between life and death. He couldn't even remember how he'd driven there. As soon as he walked in, a doctor rushed over. "Mr. Carter, your wife arrived unconscious. She suffered a severe head injury. Is she going to wake up?" The doctor paused, clearly hesitant. "We did everything to stabilize her, but she's in a coma. All we can do is wait." That single word, coma, hit him like a punch in the gut. Ethan went into Lauren's room and saw her connected to a tangle of machines. Her face was pale, her hair tangled, and the monitors echoed with a cold, mechanical rhythm. He stayed at her bedside for hours, hoping for a miracle that wouldn't come. Around midnight, he couldn't bear it anymore and stepped outside. The city, indifferent and busy, carried on. Strangers on the sidewalk paid no attention to the well-dressed man whose heart was in pieces. Lost in thought, he crossed streets without looking, his gaze drifting to the glowing buildings around him. Ethan Carter was respected by business leaders and politicians alike, but over time, his world had shrunk to little more than contracts, bids, and balance sheets. In the process, he'd lost sight of what really mattered. His wife, Lauren, had often reminded him that money wasn't everything. She was his complete opposite, an artist, a dreamer. While Ethan spent his days in endless board meetings, Lauren painted in her studio, hosted gallery shows, and, perhaps most surprising of all, volunteered at a local shelter for homeless kids. "I don't see why you care so much," he used to say. "Because somebody has to," she always replied. Every time Lauren brought it up, Ethan would just sigh and bury himself back in work. He never gave it much thought. Until now. That night, all his achievements, every dollar he'd earned, suddenly felt meaningless. It was then he noticed a pair of eyes watching him. He stopped in his tracks and spotted a boy, about 12, black, dressed in worn clothes, carrying a battered cardboard box. His hair fell across his forehead, and his gaze held an intensity far too grown up for his age. The boy looked at him without fear. "Sir," he said quietly, "I know how to save your wife." Ethan scowled. Had he heard that right? "What did you say?" he rasped. "I said I know how to save your wife." Ethan's first instinct was to ignore him. He was exhausted and desperate, and the last thing he needed was a street kid feeding him tall tales. "Look, kid, I'm really not in the mood." He turned to leave, but the boy spoke up again. "She helped me," he said. "She knows me." Ethan froze. How could that be possible? Slowly, he turned back and took a closer look. The boy's clothes were stained, his jacket frayed around the edges, and there was dust on his face. But his expression wasn't that of someone begging for spare change. "What's your name?" asked Ethan, keeping his tone cool. "Malik," the boy answered. The name meant nothing to Ethan at first. "How do you know my wife?" Malik took a deep breath as if deciding how much he should reveal. "She used to come by the shelter," he said. "She brought us food. She told us stories. Told me I didn't have to be on the streets forever." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He remembered Lauren mentioning her volunteering, though he'd always thought of it as a pointless distraction from real life. "You said you know how to save her?" he repeated, still skeptical. "How?" Malik glanced around warily. "Not here," he murmured. "Someone's watching us. I'm not sure who I can trust, especially you, sir. Lauren believed in you, but I don't know you. First, I need to see if you're really willing to help her." Ethan glanced around. Two homeless men dozed on the sidewalk. A street vendor was shutting down his cart, and a few cars rumbled along the avenue. "Who's watching us?" he asked. "The same people who hurt her." Something in the way the black boy, Malik, said it sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "What are you implying? My wife's accident was just an accident." Malik shook his head. "No, sir, it wasn't." A heavy silence settled between them. "Let's go somewhere else," Ethan suggested, suddenly trusting the kid for reasons he couldn't explain. Maybe it was because he had nothing left to lose. They walked a few blocks until they found an all-night diner. Ethan ordered a black coffee and a donut. Malik didn't order anything, but Ethan quietly handed him the donut. The boy tore into it in seconds. "Talk?" Ethan demanded, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "What do you know?" Malik brushed the crumbs from his mouth and met Ethan's eyes. "Your wife told me she was in danger." Ethan felt a shiver run through him. "Danger? Why?" Malik fiddled with the small cardboard box he carried. "She was looking into something and it got her in trouble." "What kind of investigation?" The boy hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Bad people, sir. Real bad. They're doing things at hospitals." Ethan frowned. "What kind of things?" Malik's gaze grew solemn. "Organ trafficking." "Organ trafficking?" Ethan echoed, blinking in disbelief. The very idea sounded ridiculous. A street kid telling him his wife had been digging into something that horrifying. "Listen, Malik," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice level. "I'm not sure what my wife told you, but this feels like a misunderstanding." Malik's expression stayed firm. "It's not a misunderstanding, sir. I saw it with my own eyes." Unease coiled in Ethan's stomach. "What exactly did you see?" Malik leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "People who vanish." Ethan felt his insides twist. "Explain." Glancing around to make sure no one was eavesdropping, Malik continued. "At the shelter where I lived, sometimes kids disappeared. They told us these kids got adopted, but nobody ever came back. It wasn't like other shelters where the adopted kids might send letters or pictures. Nothing here, like they vanished into thin air." Ethan crossed his arms, trying to wrap his mind around this. "And what does my wife have to do with it?" Malik took a steadying breath. "Lauren figured it out. One day she came by asking about my friend Reuben. He disappeared 2 weeks earlier. Someone at the shelter said he was adopted, but she didn't buy it. So she started asking questions." He paused before going on. "She talked to other kids, former volunteers, anybody who worked there. She found something, I'm not sure what, but one day she told me that if anything happened to her, I had to tell you." Ethan felt the air thicken. "Why didn't she tell me herself?" Malik shrugged. "Maybe because you never listened to her." Ethan's jaw tightened. It was true. He could remember all the times Lauren tried to share her worries, the things she'd witnessed while volunteering. How many times had he brushed her aside, lost in his own business concerns? But there was no ignoring it now. "You said she discovered something. Do you know what it was?" Malik hesitated. "It was a hospital." "A hospital?" Ethan repeated, confused. "Which one?" "I don't know," Malik answered quietly. "She said she had evidence, but couldn't talk about it until she was sure." A ripple of dread washed over Ethan. A hospital, organ trafficking, a suspicious accident. Suddenly, everything that seemed like a random tragedy was coming together in a chilling new way. "I need to find that evidence," he murmured. Malik nodded. "If she had any proof, it's probably in her office." Ethan stood. "Let's go." "Go where?" My place. Malik hesitated. I can't go there, sir. If you're serious about helping her, you'll come with me, Ethan said firmly. The boy fell silent for a moment, then nodded. Okay. They left the diner and walked toward Ethan's car. For the first time, he was stepping into a realm he knew nothing about. In that world, money and status meant nothing. His only guide was a black kid who'd lived on the streets. They drove through the shadowy roads of Chicago. Malik peered out the window, uneasy. He wasn't used to riding in such a fancy car, but he didn't look impressed either. He didn't trust the wealthy, and Ethan couldn't really blame him. When they finally pulled up in front of the house, Ethan cut the engine and climbed out without waiting for Malik. The boy paused before following. It wasn't at all like those sleek, modern mansions Malik had seen on TV. Instead, the place had huge windows, a bunch of plants, and a yard that clearly hadn't been tended in a while. You could tell someone had put heart and soul into decorating it. "Hurry!" Ethan urged, impatience in his voice. Malik trailed him with careful footsteps. They walked through the living room and up a set of stairs into an art studio with a large window overlooking the backyard. The space was packed with paintings, brushes, and shelves brimming with old books. Ethan stopped abruptly. The smell of turpentine still lingered, as though Lauren might walk in any second, hands covered in paint and a bright smile on her face. But she wasn't coming back. Malik surveyed the room with curiosity. He headed to a desk and began rifling through drawers with the speed of someone who's used to searching for hidden things. "It's got to be here somewhere," he muttered. "What exactly are you looking for?" Ethan asked, arms folded. "If she had evidence, she'd hide it in something that wouldn't draw attention," Malik replied, sifting through sketches and loose papers. Ethan looked around, trying to imagine where Lauren might have stashed something that important. Then it hit him. He strode over to a bookshelf where Lauren kept her journals. He pulled out a black, hardcover notebook she often used for rough sketches before painting. He flipped it open. The first pages were covered in scribbles and notes on color palettes and textures, but soon the handwriting grew tighter, more rushed. Ethan started reading. "There's something going on at this hospital that doesn't add up. Patients come in and never leave. No death certificates on record. They just vanish. Where do they go? I've been warned to stop asking questions, that it's not my concern. But it is. If what I suspect is true, it's worse than I ever imagined." Malik is right. The children who vanish aren't being adopted. Some are being transferred here. But why? I need to talk to Ethan, but if I do, he might be in danger too. I don't know how much they know. If they find out he's aware, they might come after him. What should I do? Ethan's throat tightened. She'd wanted to come to him, but never did, maybe because she thought he wouldn't care. "What's it say?" Malik asked, watching him anxiously. Ethan swallowed hard. "She talks about a hospital. She says people go missing there." Malik balled his fists. "I told you." As Ethan flipped to the final pages, he saw a name scrawled over and over. San Gabriel. San Gabriel, he murmured. It was a private high-end hospital with a spotless reputation, one of those places that only catered to the wealthy. Why would Lauren have been digging into that? "You know where it is?" Malik asked. Ethan nodded. They both went quiet, aware this could change everything. He didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, he stayed in the studio, reading and rereading Lauren's notes. Every sentence felt like a warning he'd chosen to ignore. San Gabriel isn't what it seems. Patients go in and never come out. I need proof. If something happens to me, Ethan must know. Meanwhile, Malik dozed off on the living room couch, wrapped in an old blanket Ethan found. Though the boy's breathing was even, his face stayed tense, as if he were braced for trouble even in his sleep. By 4:37 a.m., Ethan was still awake, phone in hand, scrolling through public info on San Gabriel. Everything looked squeaky clean, cutting-edge technology, top-ranked doctors, partnerships with international clinics, a flawless track record. Too perfect. He reached for a cigarette, an old habit he'd given up years ago. That night, it came right back, fueled by sheer anxiety. If Lauren was right, then her so-called accident was no accident. Someone had tried to shut her up. When Malik woke up, Ethan was already dressed in a crisp suit, looking like he was about to close a major deal. But his mind was a million miles away. "We're going to the hospital," he announced bluntly. Malik rubbed the sleep from his eyes and eyed him warily. "Why?" "I need to see her," Ethan said. The boy hesitated. "That's risky." "I know," Ethan replied. "But if she's still there, I have to find out what they're doing with her." Malik didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded anyway. They got into the car. All the way to the hospital, Ethan kept running through all the signs he'd missed. Lauren had been in danger for weeks, and he had barely noticed. By the time they pulled up to St. Gabriel Medical Center, the building's glossy marble and gleaming glass facade practically screamed privilege and power. Getting in was no issue. Ethan was well known, and no one dared to question him. He made his way to Lauren's assigned room, but something was off. The bed was empty. "Where's my wife?" Ethan demanded, struggling to keep his temper under control. The nurse on duty glanced at the chart, frowning. "Mr. Carter, your wife was moved last night to another floor for a neurological exam. I'm not sure why you weren't notified, but—" Ethan didn't wait for her to finish. He spun on his heel and stormed toward the nurse's station. Something felt wrong. Malik, who'd been quiet the entire time, tugged on Ethan's jacket. "They're watching us," he muttered under his breath. From the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed a man in plain clothes at the far end of the corridor, pretending to scroll on his phone. "Get out of here, Malik," Ethan whispered. "Go now. I don't want you getting caught up in this." The boy hesitated, then nodded and slipped away down the hall. Ethan pressed on until he reached the reception desk. "I want to see my wife," he said tersely. "Right now." The nurse looked at her computer screen. "Sir, the doctor in charge." "I don't care about the doctor, just tell me where she is." "I'm sorry, but—" Ethan slammed his fist on the desk. "Take me to her." Swallowing hard, the nurse replied, "She's in the ICU." A cold wave of dread washed over Ethan. What were they doing to her? The hallway to the intensive care unit was long and quiet. Every step he took only heightened his unease. Malik's warning echoed in his head. "We're being followed." At the ICU entrance, a nurse stood in his path. "Mr. Carter, you can't go in without permission," she said. "I'm her husband," he snapped, trying not to lose his cool. "Visiting here is restricted." "I need to see her now," she hesitated. "Please wait here. I'll check with the doctor." She vanished down a side corridor, leaving Ethan clenching his fists. Every instinct told him something was seriously wrong. "Sir?" came a hushed voice. Ethan turned to see a young male nurse at the corner of the hallway, looking tense. "If you're going to see her, do it now, before the higher-ups show up." Ethan felt a jolt of fear. What are they doing to her? The nurse glanced around like he was afraid of being overheard. "I don't know. They brought her in last night and aren't letting anyone near her. None of us even know what meds they're giving her." Fury flared inside Ethan. This was being hidden on purpose. Without a second thought, he shoved open the door. Lauren lay inside, connected to machines and an oxygen tube. her skin almost ghostly in the harsh fluorescent light. Despite everything, her vital signs appeared normal. Why was she stuck in the ICU? Ethan moved closer, gently lifting her hand. "Lauren?" She didn't respond, but he caught the faintest flutter of her eyelids. She wasn't in a deep coma. "What are they doing to you?" he whispered. He heard footsteps pounding in the corridor. Someone was coming. Holding Lauren's hand, Ethan felt his own pulse race. He refused to let them take her. The door flew open. "Mr. Carter," said a cold voice, "we need you to step outside." Two men in suits stared at him down, their expressions blank, but their eyes hard as steel. They definitely weren't doctors. Ethan squared his shoulders, staying right by Lauren's bed. His mind raced, and danger pulsed in his gut. "I'm not going," he said flatly. "I want to talk to the hospital director." One of the men, a tall guy with a sharp jaw, stepped forward, closing in on him. "The director isn't available. We need you to leave right now." The second man, shorter but visibly on edge, shut the door behind him, cutting off Ethan's exit. This wasn't just about restricted visiting hours. Ethan let go of Lauren's hand and straightened up. "If you won't let me see my wife, I'll file a formal complaint," he warned in a calm yet threatening tone. The taller man stared back, unfazed. "That wouldn't be wise, Mr. Carter." A surge of unease roiled in Ethan's stomach. They weren't simply requesting he leave, they were cautioning him. Before he could say another word, the door swung open again. A woman in a white lab coat burst in, her demeanor all business but noticeably strained. "Back off," she ordered the men. "I'll handle this." They hovered a moment, exchanging a glance, then shuffled out without comment. The doctor waited until the door clicked shut before turning to Ethan. "You really shouldn't be here," she said. "I'm her husband," he fired back. "I want to know exactly what you're doing to her." The doctor let out a tired breath. "She was just like you, asking way too many questions." A chill swept over Ethan. "What does that mean?" She stepped over to Lauren's machines and adjusted a couple of settings. "I can't talk here. There are cameras." "Then take me someplace where you can." She hesitated, clearly frightened, then pulled a small pad from her pocket. After scribbling something on a sheet, she tore it out and slipped it to him. 9 o'clock tonight, parking garage, level 2. Ethan took the note, never looking away from her. "If she's in danger, I need to know immediately." The doctor locked eyes with him. "She is. And so are you." Without another word, she turned and left. Ethan drew in a shaky breath. His worst fears were coming true. This wasn't an accident. Someone had tried to silence Lauren, and now he was a target as well. He stepped out into the cool Chicago evening, lungs burning as his mind raced. Lauren's life was hanging in the balance, and so was his. Glancing at the note, level 2, 9 p.m., he realized he only had about 20 minutes. He walked over to his car but didn't get inside, instead leaning against the door to watch the lot. Someone was definitely keeping tabs on him. Then Malik, a black boy who'd been waiting in the shadows, approached. "Well?" the boy asked quietly. "It wasn't an accident," Ethan said grimly. "Somebody wants to shut her up." Malik's hands tightened into fists. "Told you so." Ethan checked his watch. 8:55 p.m. "I have to meet that doctor. Stay put." The boy looked like he wanted to argue, but he only nodded, biting back whatever protest was on his tongue. Ethan headed down the emergency stairs to level 2 of the garage. It was nearly empty, lit by a few flickering bulbs, the atmosphere thick with tension. Then he spotted her, the doctor, standing beside a black sedan with her arms folded and eyes full of worry. "We've got limited time," she said as he approached. "Tell me the truth," he demanded. "What are they doing to my wife?" She swallowed hard. "They've put her in a medically induced coma. Not because she needs it, but because somebody upstairs told them to." Rage tightened Ethan's chest. "Who gave that order?" "I wish I knew. All I know is it started weeks ago, right when your wife began asking questions about certain patients." "Which patients?" She pulled out her phone and showed him a series of photos. Children under 12. Ethan felt the world tilt beneath him. "This is organ trafficking, isn't it?" The doctor's nod was barely perceptible. "St. Gabriel is just a front. Phony records, fake diagnoses. Kids supposedly die on the operating table, but their organs are harvested and sold." Ethan closed his eyes, fury and dread crashing over him. Lauren had been on the brink of exposing them, and that's why they nearly killed her. "If they're drugging her, we have to stop it. We have to get her out." "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "If I do anything, they'll kill me." Ethan was about to respond when a chill crept up his spine. Someone else was there. A black car sat parked a few yards away, its headlights suddenly flickering on. The doctor's face turned pale. "Go. Now," she whispered. Ethan glanced at the car, then back at her. "I'm not done with you. If you stay, neither are they." The car's engine rumbled to life, rolling forward at a slow, deliberate pace. Ethan didn't wait. He turned and bolted up the stairs 2 at a time. When he reached street level, Malik was already watching from a distance. "What happened?" the boy asked. "We need to go. Now." Malik didn't ask anything else. They jumped into the car and Ethan hit the gas, speeding off without looking back. He knew the truth now, and the real danger wasn't just what he had learned, it was the fact that they knew he knew. Ethan drove fast, too fast, but he had no other option. His thoughts raced even faster than the car. Now he was a target. Malik sat in the passenger seat, silent and stiff, his hands clenched into fists. His eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. Then, suddenly, he spoke. "Are they following us?" Ethan checked the rearview mirror. A dark green car had been trailing them for the past few blocks. He veered sharply onto a side street, heading into a dimly lit avenue. "They're gonna catch up," Malik muttered, gripping the seat so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Not if I lose them first." Ethan adjusted the mirrors, weaving through the sparse late-night traffic. The dark car turned after them. This wasn't a coincidence. Malik braced himself against the dashboard. "What do we do?" Ethan made a split-second decision. He slammed the brakes just before reaching an overpass and killed the lights. The black car zoomed past, unaware they had stopped. They sat in absolute silence. The car kept moving, disappearing into the distance. Malik exhaled, his breath shaky. That was way too close. Ethan restarted the engine but didn't drive off right away. His hands tightened around the steering wheel as he took a deep breath. "This won't stop, will it?" Malik didn't look at him. "No, not until they think you've given up." But Ethan wasn't about to give up. They made it back to Ethan's house in under 15 minutes. As soon as the car stopped, Malik jumped out and ran to the front door. Ethan followed, his heart still pounding. The second they stepped inside, he locked the door behind them. "We need a plan," Ethan said, rubbing his face. "I can't just walk into that hospital alone. If they try to stop me, I need leverage, something to force their hand." Malik frowned, deep in thought. Then his face lit up. "Lauren's notebook. If she found names, they'll be in there." Ethan nodded and rushed to the study. He grabbed Lauren's black notebook, flipping through the pages with new urgency. And then he saw it. A list of names. Children, adults, people with no identification. Dates were scribbled next to each entry. But what made his skin crawl was the last note at the bottom of the page. Next transfer, November 15th. 2 kids from the shelter. Destination, St. Gabriel. Ethan checked the date on his watch. November 14th. Damn it. Malik, reading over his shoulder, clenched his jaw. They're taking them tomorrow. Ethan snapped the notebook shut. We're not letting that happen. Malik's eyes burned with a mix of fear and anger. Then what do we do? Ethan took a deep breath and turned to him. Tomorrow, we're going to that hospital. We're going to stop this, and we're getting Lauren out. Malik nodded, his expression firm. They were running out of time. The dashboard clock read 5:30 MDM when Ethan and Malik parked a few blocks from St. Gabriel Medical Center. The city was slowly waking up, but Ethan had been wired all night. This was it. Either they saved Lauren today, or they lost her forever. Malik sat in the passenger seat, tense. His left hand gripped the straps of his old backpack like a lifeline. You sure you're up for this? Ethan asked, glancing at him. The boy didn't hesitate. I'm not backing out. Ethan handed him a burner phone. If anything goes wrong, run and call this number. He's a journalist. Tell him you have proof. Malik took the phone and stuffed it into his bag. Nothing's gonna go wrong. I wish I had his confidence. They walked into the hospital without a hitch. Ethan still carried enough influence in those halls to avoid suspicion. He gave a quick nod to the receptionist and headed straight for the elevator, Malik trailing just a few steps behind. You think they already know we're here? Malik whispered. Maybe, Ethan muttered, but they have to pretend everything's normal. The elevator doors slid open and they stepped inside. Ethan hit the button for the ICU floor. The ride was silent, tension thick in the air. When the doors parted, an unsettling feeling gripped Ethan's stomach. Everything looked the same, but something was off. The halls were eerily empty. They moved toward the nurses' station. I want to see my wife, Ethan stated firmly. The nurse met his gaze with an unreadable expression. Wait here. I'll inform the doctor. No, he wasn't waiting. Before anyone could stop him, Ethan strode forward. When he reached Lauren's room, he shoved the door open and froze. The bed was empty. The sheets were disheveled. The monitors turned off. She was gone. No, Ethan breathed, panic clawing at his throat. He turned to Malik, who was staring at the scene with wide eyes. They took her? The boy murmured. But where? Come on, Ethan snapped, already heading for the hallway. They weren't alone. 2 men stood waiting, blocking his path. Mr. Carter, the man in the center said, his voice steady. You need to come with us. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. Malik took a cautious step back. I don't think that's going to happen, Ethan said coldly. The man smirked, humorless. That wasn't a request. One of the men reached for Ethan's arm. Instinct took over. Ethan yanked free and drove his fist into the man's jaw. The guy stumbled, stunned. Run! Someone shouted. Ethan didn't wait to see who. He spun and bolted, Malik right beside him. They had to find Lauren before it was too late. They sprinted through the corridors of St. Gabriel Medical Center, dodging startled nurses and patients. Behind them, the suited men were in pursuit, but Ethan had one advantage. He knew this hospital. This way, he barked, veering through a restricted access door. They dashed down the emergency stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. Malik was breathing hard, but never hesitated. "Where do you think they took her?" the boy panted. Ethan clenched his jaw. Not a regular patient room. If they had removed her from the ICU, they needed her somewhere out of sight, somewhere no one would ask questions. "The basement," he said suddenly. Malik's eyes widened. "You sure?" "It makes sense," Ethan muttered, recalling Lauren's notes. "If they're hiding her, they wouldn't risk keeping her in a common area." Wasting no time, they headed toward the service elevator. Ethan jabbed the basement button. The screen flashed. Restricted access. "Damn it," he cursed. "Then we take the stairs," Malik said. They pushed through a side door and hurried downward. The deeper they went, the darker and quieter it became. At the lowest level, they reached a narrow hallway lined with metal doors, dim overhead lights flickering ominously. "What is this place?" Malik whispered. "Somewhere that's not supposed to exist," Ethan muttered. And if he was right, this was where they were keeping Lauren. They crept forward. The first door was locked, so was the second, but when Ethan twisted the handle of the third, it clicked open. Inside, rows of gurneys filled the space. Some were empty, some were not. Malik halted, his breath catching. No way. 2 children lay on the beds, unconscious or worse. They were small, too young to be in a place like this. Ethan's stomach twisted with rage. This was the proof Lauren had been chasing. Malik approached one of the beds. "They're getting ready to move them," he whispered. Ethan scanned the room, no sign of Lauren. Then, from the farthest corner, he caught something, a faint sound. His gaze snapped to the shadowed section of the room, and there she was, Lauren, hooked to an IV, her skin pale under the harsh lights. Her breaths were shallow, but she was alive. "Lauren!" Ethan rushed to her side. Malik darted to the door, locking it behind them. Ethan cupped Lauren's face gently. "I'm getting you out of here, do you hear me? We're leaving." Her eyelids fluttered. She was trying to wake up, but they were running out of time. Any second now, someone would come looking for them. His heartbeat pounded in his chest. She was alive, but barely conscious. "We need to wake her up," he said, checking the IV bag hooked to her arm. Malik read the label. "This isn't normal medicine," he muttered. Ethan grabbed the bag and scanned the label. It was a sedative. "That's why she won't wake up," he growled. Without hesitation, Ethan yanked the IV bag free, letting it drop to the floor with a soft thud. "What now?" Malik asked, his voice urgent. "We wait," Ethan replied. Lauren needed time to regain consciousness, but they didn't have much of it. A metallic clatter made them both freeze. Someone was trying to open the door. "Shit," Ethan muttered under his breath. Malik sprang into action, dragging a chair over to jam the door handle. "This won't hold them for long," the boy warned. Ethan leaned over Lauren, gripping her hand. "Baby," he whispered. "Emmy." Her voice was weak, but it was enough. A wave of relief surged through him. "I'm here. We're getting out of this." But the door shuddered violently as someone rammed into it from the other side. "There's nowhere to run," a voice barked. "Open the damn door!" Malik looked at Ethan, fear flickering in his dark eyes. Ethan's gaze darted around the room. There had to be another way out. Then he saw it. A vent high up on the wall. "Malik, get in there," he ordered. The boy shook his head. "Not without you." "Do it," Ethan growled. Malik hesitated for only a second before scrambling onto a table and squeezing into the air duct. The door cracked again, barely holding on. It wouldn't last. Lauren's eyelids fluttered. "Ethan, what's going on?" she murmured. "We're going home, baby," he whispered, wrapping an arm around her. The door finally gave way, swinging open with a crash. 3 men in dark suits stormed in, their expressions devoid of emotion. "It's over, Carter," one of them said. Ethan stepped in front of Lauren, his stance defiant. "If you touch me, the truth will come out." They hesitated. Malik, he had the evidence. And right now, he was getting away. One of the men pulled a gun. "We can't take that risk." Before he could fire, an explosion echoed from above. The men flinched, glancing up. Malik had done something. A fire alarm blared through the building. Chaos erupted. That was all Ethan needed. He grabbed a metal tray from the bedside table and slammed it into the gunman's head. The man stumbled, the gun slipping from his hand. Without wasting a second, Ethan scooped Lauren into his arms and ran. They just needed to make it outside. Alarms screeched overhead as staff scrambled through the halls, trying to figure out what was happening. Perfect. Shouts rang out behind him. "Carter, stop right now!" He didn't look back. Taking the emergency stairs 2 at a time, Ethan clutched Lauren against him, his muscles burning. She was still weak, barely conscious, but there was no way he was leaving her behind. At last, he burst through the back exit. Cool night air hit him like a slap. They were just steps from freedom, but a black car was already there, waiting. A man stepped out of the driver's seat, raising a gun. "Don't move, Carter," he ordered. "You can't win." Ethan clenched his jaw. Running wasn't an option. Not with Lauren in his arms. Then, out of nowhere, a blue sedan came barreling into the lot. It slammed into the black car with a sickening crunch. The driver's side door flew open. "Get in!" Malik yelled. Ethan didn't hesitate. He threw open the back door and laid Lauren inside as fast as he could. Just as he was about to climb in himself, a strong hand clamped onto his arm. "Not so fast, Carter," a cold voice murmured. He turned. The tall man who had threatened him before stared back, his expression unreadable, calm, calculated. Malik didn't wait. He grabbed a metal pipe from the front seat and swung it, hitting the man square in the head. The man staggered. Ethan ripped free, diving into the car. "Go!" Malik floored the gas. Gunshots rang out as the car fishtailed out of the lot, disappearing into the dark city streets. They had escaped, for now. Ethan twisted in his seat, looking at Lauren. Her half-lidded eyes flickered open, and this time she truly saw him. His throat tightened. "You're back," he whispered. But they weren't safe yet. The hospital, the people behind it, it was all still operating in the shadows. They had to expose the truth. As the first light of dawn crept over the city skyline, Ethan, Malik, and Lauren pulled up to a small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. They were exhausted, shaken, but they couldn't stop now. Ethan helped Lauren onto the couch. Her body was still weak, the sedatives lingering in her system. Malik shut off the engine, his hands still trembling. He exhaled sharply. "What now?" the boy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan pulled out the phone Malik had stolen the night before. "We call the only person who can blow this wide open. If they didn't make this public, the hospital would keep running its operation, and more innocent lives would be lost." 2 hours later, in an abandoned warehouse, Ethan met with the journalist. The man, in his 50s, had a graying beard and a wary expression. "This better be worth it, Carter. I don't risk my neck for bogus leads." Ethan pulled out Lauren's notebook. "It's not bogus. This is proof that St. Gabriel Medical Center is trafficking human beings." The journalist flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. Then Malik stepped forward, handing him a USB drive. "There's more on here," the boy said. Recordings, patient records, names of people who disappeared. The journalist exhaled sharply. He knew he was holding something huge. "If this checks out, I'll publish it tonight," he said, his voice grave. "But Carter, if this is as big as it looks, you're both in serious danger." Ethan's tone was cold and steady. "I already know that. Just make sure the world does too." The journalist nodded, pocketed the evidence, and walked away without another word. That night, the story exploded. Elite hospital scandal, shocking proof of organ trafficking involving doctors and business executives. The media storm was immediate. Authorities had no choice but to act. St. Gabriel was shut down, several staff members were arrested, and investigations were launched. But Ethan knew this was far from over. The real masterminds, the powerful figures funding it all, were still lurking in the shadows. Still, Lauren was safe, and so was Malik. That was all that mattered. A few days later, Lauren fully regained consciousness. When she opened her eyes, they welled with tears. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. Ethan took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Me too." Across the room, Malik sat on the windowsill, pretending not to be emotional. It wasn't that hard," he muttered. "We only almost died like 5 times." Lauren gave him a weak smile. Ethan walked over to Malik and rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I wouldn't be here without you." Malik averted his eyes. "Don't get all sappy on me, Carter." Ethan chuckled. A week later, as the chaos of the investigation faded, Ethan and Lauren sat across from Malik in their living room. The boy, who had spent years fending for himself, stared at them cautiously, arms crossed. "You don't have to do this," Malik muttered, avoiding their gaze. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lauren before leaning forward. "We want to do this, Malik. You saved our lives. You're part of this family now, if you'll have us." Malik hesitated, his tough exterior cracking just a little. "I don't know how to be in a family," he admitted. Lauren smiled warmly. "Then we'll figure it out together." For the first time in a long time, Malik let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. As they signed the adoption papers, it wasn't just Malik getting a second chance. Ethan and Lauren, once too consumed by their own lives to see what truly mattered, were starting over too. Malik had lost everything, but now, for the first time in his life, he had something he never expected: a family. And Ethan, a man who once had everything but never truly appreciated it, finally understood what really mattered: a new beginning, a new family, and this time they wouldn't take it for granted. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it so more people can uncover the truth. Your support allows us to bring more powerful, eye-opening stories like this. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop searching for the truth.